Now, Fred, I told you, is a professor emeritus from UMBC. He's also the co-president of Baltimore Jewish Cultural Chavurah, along with me. So if you don't like what I'm about to say, tell him. I'm just the messenger. Okay. So Fred says, this is called Complexities of Jewish-Black Relations. And he says, over the years, I've noticed a common theme when many Jews discuss Black-Jewish relations, especially on Martin Luther King Day. It goes something like this. The 50s and 60s were golden years when Jews marched with blacks in support of civil rights. Jews were enacting the best of their Jewishness. This unity was destroyed when black power groups asked whites to leave and work in their own communities. Black-Jewish differences increased for a variety of reasons, largely because of various things that the black community did or didn't do. This view is oversimplified at best. There have been sharp divisions in the Jewish community over issues of racial justice before, during, and after the civil rights years. A substantial portion of the Jewish community has impeded racial progress and have been perpetrators of anti-black discrimination. First, let's discuss the positive side of this issue. Jews, both religious and secular, have always been strongly overrepresented in progressive social movements. The labor movement, the movement against lynching, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. Rabbi Joachim Prince, president of the American Jewish Congress, gave the speech just before MLK's famous I Have a Dream speech in Washington in 1963. Stanley Levinson, a secular Jewish lawyer from New York, was a close associate of Martin Luther King. Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, Northern Jews, were murdered along with James Chaney by white supremacists during Mississippi Freedom Summer in 1964. Hundreds of thousands of Jews, among them my own parents, participated in demonstrations around the country. Rabbis also acted against segregation in restaurants and at Gwynn Oak Amusement Park in Baltimore. Abraham Schusterman, Abraham Shaw, and Morris Lieberman, among others. Other heroic Jews like Larry and Helene Ageloff fought for civil rights. Public opinion polls have shown that Jews are among the most liberal and least prejudiced of all race and ethnic groups. Yet, we must not forget the other side of the story. Jews who were not supportive of black equality or were perpetrators of discrimination. In my own childhood, the word schwarze, literally the Yiddish word for black, but in this case derogatory, was used by many Jewish friends and relatives. My aunt and uncle disowned my cousin for marrying a black man. MLK's 1963 letter from the Birmingham jail was an eloquent statement about the need for nonviolent direct action against segregation. The letter was a reaction to a public statement by 8 Birmingham clergy criticizing King for being an outside agitator and urging local blacks not to support his demonstrations. Quote, "We agree with ends but not means," unquote, a common ploy for Southern whites. One of the 8 signers was Milton Grafman, a Reform rabbi in Birmingham. Antero Pietola talks about some of these contradictions in Baltimore in his book, Not in My Neighborhood, How Bigotry Shaped a Great American City. Jews, who were themselves victims of restrictive covenants, also prevented blacks from moving into Jewish neighborhoods. Morris Goldsecker and Joseph Meyerhoff, now known as philanthropists. In the 1940s, Goldsecker was one of the biggest blockbusters in Baltimore and sold homes to blacks at exorbitant prices. Meyerhoff, on the other hand, refused to sell either blacks or Jews in Roland Park. The Baltimore Jewish Council, to its credit, publicly criticized these policies. Downtown department stores, both Jewish and Gentile owned, refused to let blacks try on clothes until as late as 1960. Tensions between many Jewish small businessmen and black customers and between Jewish landlords and black tenants also existed. These kinds of economic relations always cause tensions, but they become racialized when different race and ethnic groups are involved. Even back in the civil rights years, there were divisions in the Jewish community over questions of racial justice. These differences still exist today. Jews are still relatively liberal as a group. 69% voted for Obama, with only 30% for Romney in the last presidential election. In comparison, 59% of whites voted for Romney. In the 1950s and 60s, main issues were clear-cut. The right to vote, the right to buy a house in any neighborhood, the right to attend any school, the right to be hired for a job if qualified, the right to avail oneself of any public accommodation, etc. Through the struggles of blacks, Jews, and others, many of these rights are now guaranteed by law. Issues today are more complicated and have both similarities and differences from those in the past. In housing, banks have marked subprime mortgages to blacks and Hispanics, even if they can afford conventional mortgages. Voter ID cards, promoted by conservatives, are intended to dilute votes of people of color. Felon disenfranchisement laws do the same. Blacks are more likely to receive the death penalty for killing a white victim as compared with killing a black victim. In education, blacks and Hispanics still attend schools mainly with other blacks and Hispanics. Their schools tend to be older, less well-funded, less likely to have gifted and talented programs, etc. Black unemployment is still double the rate of white unemployment at the same levels of education. Blacks earn less than whites. Hopefully, progressive Jews are still willing to unite with people of color to solve these contemporary problems of racial injustice. Okay, Fred will use his limited vocal abilities to answer questions.
I'll use mine to sing.
Sing? Oh, we didn't know about this. Okay, so what we'll do is take your questions now or comments, and I'll choose, I'm not going to choose somebody a second time until everyone's had a chance to speak. And if you're going to make a comment, please keep it very brief. Ed?
Short question for Larry. You mentioned the United Steelworkers Union and that they sort of went along with this segregated system. I wonder whether they were helpful or a hindrance in trying to break it down when you approached them.
I think, we're talking about a bipolar situation. I think organized labor, I think you're talking about almost a bipolar situation. Organized labor, represented by their lobbyists, their officials, will always testify in favor of civil rights laws and urge their passage. When you come down to the workers' level, that's not always so. As a matter of fact, I was looking at some material I had on the Bethlehem situation that was in the press, and the headline was, and this is when we had the compliance hearing going on in Baltimore, and the court case for the Lackawanna plan was parallel to the compliance hearing. And in that, both the union and management combined to fight to defend to fight what the government was attempting to do, and to defend the previous actions. And the biggest item that labor and the management were united on was the seniority system I mentioned in passing. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Very well.
Next. Yes.
What was the attitude towards CORE amongst the people of Baltimore and otherwise? Is it a very controversial group at the time, or not so?
I think it depends who you spoke. If you spoke to a black person, they thought you were pretty good. If you spoke to a white person, many whites anyway, they figured you were a bunch of agitators. As a matter of fact, there's a book that was written by Deborah Radisel about Bethlehem Steel, and she interviewed a lot of people. including me and including Lee Douglas. Lee Douglas, if you recall, was the organizer, the black organizer, and head of the black group at Bethlehem Steel. And she asked, well, why did you contact CORE? He says, well, we needed some rabble-rousers. He said, if you just stay still, just stay quiet and don't do anything, they ignore you. If you have some rabble-rousers there, they start paying attention. So I think that's a pretty good description of the role CORE played, at least in this in the employment situation in Baltimore.
By the way, I'm looking at that book I mentioned earlier, The Search for Social Justice. There's a 3-page segment in here from Deborah Rudisill's book, which is called Roots of Steel, Boom and Bust in an American Mill Town. And this is on the campaign that Larry described earlier in more detail. Next. Yes, Susan.
Larry, I was wondering how Cardinal Sheen got involved in the situation.
I'm going to repeat that because she's kind of quiet. She asked how Cardinal Sheehan got involved in the situation with the discrimination in Baltimore banks.
Susan, I would just have to guess. I would just be pure speculation, but I would guess somehow Bradford Jacobs contacted him. Whether it be Bradford Jacobs, after I met with him, came out with a column pointing out what was happening and the fact that we planned to hold this gigantic demonstration, which of course was a fiction. We planned to hold it according to the three of us in the employment committee, but we had no commitments from other people. We didn't attempt to reach other people for it. But so I assume he read that column, or Bradford Jacobs perhaps had an in over there. But Cardinal came prepared. He also had his the attorney for the archdiocese, Francis Moynihan, was there also. He did most of the talking. It was a good meeting. But to answer your question, pure speculation.
Any questions for Fred?
Why don't we have somebody else first?
This is really a comment on, following up on your comments about the divisions within the Jewish community towards civil rights. In a sense, I think it's still continuing. I'm on a listserv for former freedom riders, and there's been a lot of interest recently in the situation of the Palestinians, and seeing Palestinians start to follow non-violent, resistant actions, like the setting up of the tents recently. And the Freedom Riders view this as kind of an extension of their civil rights work. A large proportion, I don't know how many, of the white Freedom Riders were Jewish and participate in this discussion.
I think that's a good example of how things have gotten more complicated, because when you think of the situation in Israel and Palestine, then I think that Jewish and black views about that